Hello, everybody. My name is Robert Linkle. I'm the owner of trainingtheolderadult.com. And today we're going to talk about program design progressions for those with lower back limitations. I have a little outline here for you that we're going to work through. Our 5 standard components that we're going to pursue in each workout: a hinge, a row, split stance, an overhead action, and a loaded carry, and then progressions of each of those 3. So to start us off, we're going to look at the hinge. I'd love to do hinges first, and that way the individual is fairly fresh and they're capable and able and ready to go. We've already gone through mobilities, warm-ups, and the client is prepped and ready to start, full exercising. So looking at this individual, let's say they have chronic lower back pain. Maybe they have or have had some herniations or some, non-surgical need. Physical therapies for their lower back. Maybe they have a little bit of sciatica, maybe they have a little toe drag, some limitations that are getting severe, but I've now found an opportunity to increase some strength and mobility and to see if this can kind of more or less rescue. Okay, so let's kind of keep that person painted in our mind here while we go through this. The first exercise that I want to look at here when we look at our foundation level is a bridge. This is assuming, again, the individual can get to the floor. And the way that I always like to list these out, we're going to list out the implement that we're going to use first. And then if there's any special instructions next, we will put that in there. And then what the exercise is. So we're going to use a band. We're going to self-anchor that band. And then we're going to perform a bridge. And that would look something like this. So we'll have volume there. We'll have a self-anchored band pulling down here to the floor, another band abduction between the knees. Notice the leverage here of his chest as he comes up, and continually pulling palms down, his palms up, but the back of his hands pulling down to the floor to self-anchor that action. So this is what we're looking for here, that high leverage point, good shoulder blades, platform, and the high lift in those hips. Moving beyond that, if the individual is doing well and they're able and capable and feeling good, we will then move up to a deloaded hinge. This would now come to the vertical position. And there's all kinds of progressions that we would take them through in that bridge on the floor, from adding consistent load to feet elevated, etc. But looking at the lower back limitations, I just want to get them really strong and feeling good on the floor. The band self-anchored gives them resistance to lift against, but it's not consistent. It's not 30 pounds the whole time. So it gives them a progression of load into a position that's more stable. And then as they hinge back down and they're maybe more vulnerable in their back, it gets a little lighter. So moving beyond that, we would take them to a standing position. And we're also going to use a band for this. Special instructions would be considered deloading, and then we're going to perform a hinge or an RDL. And so a band, a deloaded hinge. Deloaded means that the band is going to anchor from above, and we are going to more or less try to make them lighter in this process as we go through. So I'm going to pop over to this one, and you'll notice here on her hinge, this individual has gluteal amnesia. So to keep her hips on, we put this extra band, the abduction band, between the knees. So she's now pushing apart, abductors on, and then the band from above is about 30 pounds if it's doubled in length. So she's probably got about 20 to 30 pounds there towards the bottom of additional assistance. She's working a nice deep hinge, working on displacing her hips. Her head and chest is up. Shoulders are at neutral. Arms are locked in, but she is getting lighter as she goes down. So we're able to train the range of motion without ideally aggravating her back. And if just working with her own body weight is aggravating, then we're able to make her lighter to allow that range of motion to occur. And so we'd work with that action for a while. And once that starts to feel good, then our next progression for our client would to take the deload away. We would still work with our band. I really like those progression and progressive loads for individuals with back limitations. So we would start in a band hip height, oops, hip height traction. I'm typing together here. Hip height traction hinge. And what that guy looks like, Lynn's kind of giving us an example of it. This gives us a abduction at the shoulder. Notice the band around her elbows here. This is pulling that shoulder into neutral. She's a little bit of a rounder, so not retracting, over retraction, and we're not protruding. We're kind of neutral holding. And then the big NT loop here is just above her hip height. We're doing that on purpose, so it pulls her back and up a little bit. It's allowing some of the pressure to come off her hips, come off her back, and she works back into what we call a traction hinge. Though the tension of the band as she goes back gets lighter, there's still assistance. So she can move forward as far as she wants and work into a decent amount of tension to pull her back. But at the top of the standing position, like she is now, we don't want the band to be so tight that she has to lean forward to counter it. We want her to be able to muscularly stand there and still support that, okay? So bridging on the floor, self-anchor, then we would progress that up to that deloaded band above hinge, and then eventually to a traction hinge. Now we've taken the tension, a vertical tension laying on the back, which is about 6 or 8 inches, whatever, the depth of their belly is basically. That's about as much gravitational pull down on the spine as they're going to have, to standing, which would be their body weight. And then we're going to deload that standing position, so it's even lighter than body weight, to the traction position where it's still their body load, but they're getting assistance being pulled up and back. So they are a tiny bit lighter at the top. And then eventually we would take that individual to a traditional body weight hinge, like a good morning. And then we would add some load and start to work from bands to the floor and come up. But as far as foundations start, this is a very good progression for an individual with some lower back limitations. All right, now moving into some of the rows. Now really this is like rows and pulls are kind of the actions that I like to incorporate here. So one of my favorite rows is a pullover. Technically it's an overhead action, but the pulling, engaging muscles that I'm looking at, that serratus, lat, and rhomboid stretch, we're really gonna get here. And so we're gonna use a dumbbell for this. We're gonna do it on the floor, and then we're gonna perform the pullover. Excuse me, we're gonna use a kettlebell for this. And so it's gonna look like so. Andy's doing a very nice job of this for us. In this nice high bridge, holding this glute angle. You can drop your hips down, but we've worked the hinges now with him, this lower back client, to a point where the hinging high bridge position should feel pretty comfortable. And what that does is put an isometric contraction on the whole backside of the body, allowing the lat and the rhomboid, the long head of the tricep, to all engage and tighten against other musculatures that are on. Rather than just laying down being relaxed, this really helps that posterior chain engage. And notice when he pulls over too, he's contacting the floor. And I love doing these on the floor because you can't go too far. There is a chance for some clients to sublux or to overextend or reach, hurt themselves, crank at the neck, something along those lines. This gives us hip activation, hip work, which is our target area, but allows for a really good, comfortable pullover action to occur. So you can do kettlebell floor pullovers. You could also do pullovers on a bench, but I like to have their feet elevated, and they can even bridge on the bench too for those clients that aren't maybe able to get to the floor. All right, our next one, we're gonna go back to some bands. We're gonna do a low anchor point. We're gonna do a pull start action. You'll see that in just a second. And then a keynote is we're gonna be in the contralateral position for that. Let's see if I spelled that wrong. There we go. Okay. So contralateral, very important for this as we go through, this is a very stabilizing position. Okay, left leg forward, right arm is pulling. Notice the rotation in here, palm down to palm up. That's a very natural action to occur. Notice the minimal, if not any, rotation at the hip and the back. She's just stabilizing tight here. This is probably the most comfortable and most common pulling position for clients. If they have lower back limitations, splitting their feet really wide in anything, curls, overhead tricep extensions, pull downs, anything they're doing standing. This can be a very good stabilizing position for the hips. It's just a wide base. They'll keep them from rocking, twisting, turning, torquing on their back. And then this natural pull start rotation. initiates with the rhomboid posterior delt, and finishes with the bicep in a natural supinated curl. So weird to see the gym with people just wandering around everywhere. I'm so used to how we are now, being in our little corners and our spots. It's kind of neat to see some of these old ones. All right, and then we're going to progress on to one of my favorite actions. This is called a pivot point, and there's bars and bands and all kinds of stuff that come together. And then we're going to do a row, and this is called a counter lean. So if you think about counter leaning in terms of inertia, I would lean back to create momentum. In this case, I want to do a counter lean back without momentum. I'm just going to kind of isometrically hold that counter lean, and this is going to give me a really nice eccentric action in the low lumbar. It's going to allow for some range of motion to occur, but it's basically like planking from my lower back, holding me in a nice tight position while I work this load on this pivot action, which is a low swinging hinge. And the weight will get a little heavier as she pulls that band or the handle, excuse me, closer to her. And, you know, she's got 115 pounds on this bar, but how much is she actually rowing? It's probably about 90 pounds on the pivot on the way back, and she's having to let that out, but her body's countering it, leaning it. Really the eccentric phase of this part here, letting it out real slow, that's the most benefit. For the lower back, the erectors to stabilize and hold her in position to allow this eccentrically to come out, to the counter lean and pull to initiate that movement from the get-go. Now she could put her feet out in front of her a little bit further, maybe getting a little more row your boat type of position. The bench could be a little higher if she's aggravated with any back issues here. Adjustments can be made, okay? But this eccentric let out, big, big, big benefit for those clients with lower back injuries. So that's kind of the top of the curve for us right now with our lower back clients, okay? All right, now we're gonna move into some split stance. Split stance, we're gonna start in the kneeling position. We're gonna use some bands. I love kneeling because it makes a lower pivot point or lower action, lower lever for the back to pivot and to manipulate. So when you lower down, puts you in a safe position, pretty safe position to allow this hip displacement to occur. Now I'm cueing him, I'm coaching him. Still not where I want him yet. He starts sitting back a little more, and then he's going to lift his chest up and get just a tiny bit higher. He's going to give me a little more pull in the shoulders back right there. Now this is the action we're looking for right there, okay? Nice high range of motion. Notice the rotation of the hands, palms away, palms forward. He's in a constant counter lean, butt down and back, nice straight back, eccentrically stretching out those hamstrings, his glutes, stabilizing at the core to allow his lats to create this action overhead. Oops, I skipped split stance, didn't I? Yeah, I did. All right, we'll come back to that. I think I'm in the wrong station here. Let me see. Yep, I went right to overhead. Okay, so let me cut this. We'll paste that in there. We're going to keep rolling with overhead since I'm on that action. So kneeling overhead pull. After that, we're going to follow to a landmine. And again, from the kneeling position, but half kneeling. So we're working the lever of the body here against the lever of a landmine. And the beauty of this in this half kneeling position is I can lean my mass and lean my tension into this leverage of the landmine. And I can establish an overhead action without bearing 100% of that weight. So a 35-pound bar on a pivot, probably about 20 pounds, maybe 25 pounds towards the top. And I can use my body's leverage to lean and reach. I can train the overhead action without officially being independent, like a military press, being independently responsible for the weight that's going overhead. So we would pull from overhead first, then we would work to our landmine half kneeling. I like that half kneeling. That contralateral position is very good again for the lower back. Single arm press, and we would get, of course, both sides. And then our last one, we're going to work to a full pivot point. Now, I know everybody doesn't have these landmine or these lever arms. You can use the pivot points like I showed Mary doing the seated row a minute ago. You can use that same setup. You just turn around the other way. And what I really like and why I wanted to show these is these high suspended bands. These are 35-pound lever arms for Gary. Gary has a rotator cuff injury and a labral injury in the other shoulder. So deep flexion stuff's really been bothering him. So what we've done here is we've attached these bands to make the 35 pounds lighter at the bottom right there and to assist him in changing direction. It's just a little bit lighter, and that's worked really well. He can work into a little hinge where he leans in and presses. So it's pretty close to, a kneader press, 45-degree Bob kneader press, or an overhead press if you lean in further. And he knows the split stance, protecting his lower back there. It's allowing him to reach, stagger, and not twist, counter at the hips, okay? So it's a nice lever arm, overhead action, arm, kneader press, or full military press, overhead press we call it. So there's a couple options there for him to look at. Now we're going to jump back to our split stance, and we are going to start with deloaded step up. So I'm going to use my band again, and we're going to deload our step ups. We will alternate this as we go through, and that guy is here. So Ruth is going to give us a good demonstration. Kind of the same idea as like a slingshot. As I come down, the band is going to transition and tighten, and it's going to assist me in my pull up. You'll notice she's a little shifty in her hips. We start coaching and cueing that. Start emphasizing pushing on the heel, being tall, allowing herself to come down soft to not impact the floor too much, but that band is giving her a little assistance. If she's 150 pounds, she's probably about 130 at the bottom, 150 back at the top. So we're training the action, we're working the range of motion. Once again, not full body weight just yet. Then we're going to do a band self-anchored step up. So we'll progress into this guy here, self-anchor, which means we're going to anchor it to our own bodies. And these are going to be a single leg. And what that means, is this guy over here is going to be alternating. Indicate that as we go through. So self-anchor here, my man John, band is under the foot. There's much tension as he is tall. So as he comes down on the single, slow and steady, re-engages, drives up. He could, if he wanted more tension, instead of getting a bigger band, he could just raise his arms up higher, maybe put the band up towards his forehead, or reach all the way overhead if he's so talented. If it's too much, he just lowers his arms a little bit. So this is a very happy medium for us to work through. We did all 12 reps, 15 reps, whatever we're doing on one side, and then transition to the other. And from there, we would move to our next exercise. All right. And we come back here to our last split stance, which is going to be so I'm going to call it a loaded gait, but it's also an overload step up, okay? So gait steps traditionally step out and return a little bit longer than the client or the individual's regular step. So if I take a 1.5 step as my regular gait, ideally I'd want to be able to progress out to 3 feet and come back. In this case, stepping really far out and then trying to transition back with weight with an individual with lower back issues could probably aggravate or trigger more. So even though I've deloaded and then I've self-anchored, my next step would then to work horizontally into some split stance actions like a split squat or a lunge. Because I don't want to do that with the lower back, we're going to go to an overload step up. So we're going to use a dumbbell, overload, step up, and this is going to be single leg as well. And the reason I like the single legs is we can really focus one leg without worrying about the coordination, without worrying about the coordination of trying to alternate the feet and come back down. We have this one single leg drive up, overload meaning she only has one weight, the other side is countering. It's not an even tension as normal, a little wobbly knee. Okay, you notice that as I'm coaching and cueing her, I keep cueing to come down a little softer. There's a few of those that she kind of crashes down on. And this leg sticking out in the back, we call it a kickstand. So there's not a huge impact back on the floor. If she does come down kind of heavy, we want to use that as like a shock absorb for her lower back with the limitation there. Now, if she were to bring her leg up right here, let's say we brought the knee up towards the chest, like she was going to simulate another step up and then lost her balance, her left foot would be up here towards the electrical it would be a huge return to try to swing that leg back to the floor to catch her from falling over. And in those cases, we're probably going to aggravate or have a high risk of aggravation for the back. So we keep that kickstand there. We work this overload so it's difficult to balance. This is great for seeking muscular qualities of the lower back if one side's stronger than the other, which almost always is the case. That's why the limitation's there. One side is over-dominant, overwhelming. The other side's weaker and exposed. So this is a great way to hold 30 pounds in one hand and get the right counter side strong, and then switch that, get the left counter side strong. So you have some very good benefits to work there. And then into the loaded carries with this individual, we would start with a wall sit, and then we would eventually add load. I don't have a video of that. I think everybody knows wall sits pretty well. I like to sit to 90 degrees, just like you're sitting in a chair at parallel, heel dominant, shoulders back, hands off the thighs. And then if we're able to put maybe a sandbag, something like that on their thighs, that would be great. And then our next one, we're going to use something called a fat bell. We're going to hold it in a goblet position. We're going to do an exercise called a sit to stand and transfer. This is also one of our test protocols for our clients as they start to progress through our ability levels. You'll see these 5 sit to stands, total unload every time they come down, re-engage, come up, and then when they're ready, they're using kettlebells here, but I like to use the fat bells. They're going to come up, and then they're going to transfer to the other side. Small, quick little steps. Core center, back is even because the weight is dead center. They're going to transition about 25 feet and then come on back. Smoother, quicker feet as best they can. And when they get back to this position, they will start again. That would be 1 rep, and let's say we would do that, 3 or 4 times. And then our last one, we would transition to what we call a hands off carry. And this is one of my favorite carries. Just like it sounds, you're not allowed to touch it. Little loops through the hands. Hands are open. This is very anti-arthritic. So we're working all the extensors of the wrist. And it's very difficult to keep these in place without them slipping around unless you go really smooth, really slow, which is exactly what the lower back needs. Smooth, steady, consistent. You see knee injuries, back injuries, wobbling, hobbling. All we're trying to quiet as they go through these slow, steady, loaded carries. Don't touch it. It's great for the forearms, extensors, the wrist, anything to get the front side of the body or the front side of the arm stronger than the back side. That is very ideal. For lower back, elbow, knee, hip injuries. Smooth, steady. Knows Laura here is pre-knee replacement. She's wobbling a little bit. You should see her now. Jerry's pre-knee replacement as well. He's got a hip that's already been redone, but a new knee on the way. All right, so there is your model. Lower back limitations, rather broad, but it gives you an idea. Your foundational clients could start and then work up to an ADL plus, and then eventually a full strength and conditioning program. And again, based on the outcome, strength gain, hypertrophy, conditioning, you would pick your loads, your tempos, all of your volume controls, rep sets, recovery, etc. Hope you enjoyed this. Be sure to check out trainingtheolderadult.com for more information. We really appreciate you giving us some time going through this, and stay tuned for the next episode, which we will probably go up to the upper body and look at the shoulder. All right, everybody, have a great day. Thank you. Bye.